Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's show, The Order Paper. And it's been a very slim week in Parliament this week. Only one select committee hearing, and that bill was, oh God, it's a very fun thing trying to figure out, remembering what the bills are called, because you forgot to check your notes on the screen. They're not right in. The Land Transport Drug Driving Amendment Bill. So, and we've got tonight our good old favourite Laura Tiara White, and we also got Rachel Ford, who is an expert in drug driving prevention. Is that the right
that could have gone so wrong. You're an expert in drug driving. It's like, no.
So, would that be the best way to describe your expertise, Rachel?
Yeah, I've worked in the area 20 years, and it took me into university to do a bit more study on the policy area. So, yeah, I do know a fair bit about the issue. Starting with, actually, my mother was killed in a crash in 2004 to do with somebody drug driving. Yeah, who was a menace on the road and had been constantly crashing and not drug tested except by his methadone clinic. And then 40 days before he killed my mum, he went to court for riding off 3 cars when he was drugged out of his brain. That wasn't detected by police, but he was sentenced to traffic school for 40 days earlier. They're like, careless driving. He's been careless driving a lot. He's ridden off a lot of cars in the last few years. Traffic school's needed for this guy.
Yeah, that's definitely not a fun way to sit there and look at it. And Laura, how have you been since you've last been on the show?
Pretty good. As someone who has been hit by a minibus, I can empathise with what Rachel has gone through. It is not fun being in a motor vehicle crash. I have never been a drug driver myself, except on prescription drugs, taking legal dosage. And thankfully, in my case, the other person was not drugged up, but they hit me through distractive driving. But yeah, drug driving is absolutely a problem. The amount of people I've encountered that have engaged in drug driving, yeah, I know, because having a background in forestry, I've met a lot of people who smoke, who are high when they go driving down the road, who have taken pee and they go driving down the road. It's a problem. It's a real problem. And it's a problem that I'm very concerned about.
Okay, so let's get to the first part of the show. We're going to see good old Uncle Andy, as he's got the title for It's in the Ballot. We always call Andy Foster Uncle Andy, and we'll head over to what has been highlighted as a starting point of a submission, which is Nick Smith and, is it Karen Dow?
Karen Dow, yeah.
Okay, I'm just hoping now we got that close to.
Are you able to hear me okay there?
We can. We can hear you and see you, Your Worship.
Lovely. Thank you for the opportunity, and can I acknowledge my former parliamentary colleagues and the opportunity this morning to make this submission.
But Nick, just before you
that the Dow family...
Nick, just before we start, we've got you down for 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time, but I will let you know when there's a couple of minutes to go.
Good as gold. Thanks,
Okay,
Andy.
right.
Can I also acknowledge Karen Dow is also, this is a joint submission with the Dow family. My interest in this, and I'd say more than interest, passion about this issue, was driven by a terrible accident on the 31st or New Year's Eve in 2017, when Matthew Dow was killed by a woman off her face on drugs in Appleby, Nelson. Matthew was a very talented young man who was holidaying. He was travelling from Nelson to Kaiteriterre. There'd been repeated reports of this particular driver driving incredibly recklessly, and the accident cost him his life that evening. For the last 6 years, I have been and made a commitment to the family to do everything I could to see random roadside drug testing introduced, and the submission this morning is a continuance of that campaign. When I look at the statistics of 105 actual deaths per year where people have drugs in their system, And just ever since we launched the petition in Nelson that was presented to Parliament, is I've just been amazed by literally dozens and dozens of families contacting me from all over New Zealand wanting to support the introduction of random roadside drug testing. I would share with the Select Committee my experience in the 1990s. All of the arguments that you're hearing this morning were equally heard when in the 1990s random alcohol testing was introduced. And what we saw with that measure was that within 5 years, the number of alcohol deaths had been more than halved. I believe this road safety measure has exactly the same potential, effectively to halve the road fatalities from drug-impaired driving in New Zealand. That's almost a death a week, and that's why I would plead with the Select Committee to exactly the same as in the 1990s, have the courage to carry through with this road safety measure. For all the naysayers, I'd point out that both in the United Kingdom and Australia, this safety measure has been in place and has been successful. I do think that the Select Committee needs to be quite practical in the way in which they introduce these provisions to make them workable for the police. The thresholds in the law that was passed some years ago was almost a law that was intended to fail, and would really want the Select Committee to get reassurances from both the Ministry of Transport and Police that second time round, this measure is going to be implementable. I'd like to hand over to Karen Dow, the chief petitioner that came through, and the mother of Matthew Dow, who was killed by a drug-impaired driver back in 2017.
Thanks, Nick. We've got Karen there.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Good morning. I'd like to thank Nick for his continued support with this issue. I was an intensive care nurse during that time where roadside breath testing, alcohol breath testing was introduced. And I, in my workplace, saw firsthand the dramatic effects this had on casualties and road deaths. Matthew's death was not an accident, but rather a preventable incident caused by a drug-fueled driver. In the UK and Australia, a line has been drawn in the sand, and I believe that we need to do the same here. One could argue degrees of impairment, but you could also argue degrees of impairment with the current alcohol breath testing level. A seasoned drinker could argue that they are not impaired at 250 micrograms, whereas a infrequent drinker could be off their face. So I think arguing the degree of impairment is like arguing the length of a piece of string. There's never going to be an end to it. But I think morally, any government has responsibility when there is a known cause for 1/3 of all road deaths being caused by a factor, that we have the tools and we have the manpower to be able to reduce this factor significantly. I would find it morally reprehensible that no government would take action when you had the ability to reduce one single factor that accounts for 1/3 of all road deaths. I acknowledge Julianne Genter in her Road to Zero project, and that there was no mention of driver attitude or driver impairments in her submissions to improve road safety. I find this negligent in the fact that we have a known cause for 1/3 of road deaths, and yet to this day, no government has been able to implement a robust measure as they have with seatbelts or breath testing to significantly reduce road toll?
Karen, thank you. I've got questions, first of all, from Tom Rutherford, then from Grant McCallum, and then I've got one if we've got time.
Thank you.
I'm going to use the buffer I've got here at the moment, guys, so take us to, but we've got about another 3 minutes. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Nick and Karen, both for your submissions. My question is to Nick. Nick, you highlighted what you saw in the 1990s around submissions received at that time around drink driving, and have likened some of the feedback that we've been receiving around people having apprehension towards this legislation in 2024 with drug driving. Can you talk us through the similarities you've seen from the 1990s with drink driving and now in 2024 with drug driving, and what your response would be to those people who are opposed to it for various different reasons?
The two big arguments in the 1990s against random roadside breath testing, was that firstly, I have to do a breath test even though there is no other evidence that I'm in any way breaking the road rules. It is totally a random test. And so this whole Bill of Rights legal argument, and I say that it was wrong then and it's wrong now. The imposition on me when I drive down the road, as I did a fortnight ago and was pulled over for 2 minutes to have a breath test, in my view, was a very small inconvenience that I'm happy to have, knowing that there are not going to be drunk drivers on the road. The second argument that was put forward in the 1990s, but alcohol affects people differently. Some person can drink 3 jugs and they're safe as a church, and others have 1 jug of beer and are a risk. My view is we hear exactly the same argument about drug impairment. Inevitably, when you are a regulator, you have to push a line in the sand. And in my view, that is absolutely true of drugs, whether it be cannabis or P or any of those mind-altering drugs. Inevitably, to make the regime practical and workable, you have to make exactly the same call with alcohol, draw a line and enforce it.
Thanks, Nick. Grant.
Yeah, g'day. Morning, Nick and Karen. Thank you for your submissions. But question for you, Nick. I know you tried a couple of times to introduce a random testing bill through a members' bill. Why were you unsuccessful? What went wrong there, mate?
I had 4 separate attempts at bringing a bill into the House, and as you know, you can seek leave in the House to do so. So in 2018, 2019 and 2020, tried to seek leave of the House. I had a bit of a scrap with the Speaker at the time, and I was deeply offended that the Speaker of the House chose to block the bill. That resulted in a bit of a, where I got biffed out of the House. I don't regret it. My view is that when I've got families like the Dowers who have lost innocent lives, but I was disappointed. In my view, the previous government had a huge blind spot because of their soft policy on drugs to this issue of road safety. And when you look at that data of 105 deaths per year, my view is that because of the wider debate and tension between Labor and the Greens over broader drug policy, this was a blind spot. I really thank the Labor members of the Select Committee for supporting the second attempt at trying to introduce random drug site testing, because I really do think, as in the UK and Australia, it's got the potential to save lives.
Thanks, Nick. And look, one quick question from me, and if I've got time, I'll go to Julianne as well. And that's, you've gone for random. Now, one of the questions is the cost of doing these is a lot higher, as we understand it, than the cost of doing random alcohol testing. But if you were doing them in association with random alcohol testing, so you stop one for alcohol, go, I think I might do drugs in this one as well. Does that work for you?
Yes, it does. I've got a huge level of confidence that our police are going to be focused on trying to get the best road safety dividend for New Zealanders. One of the things that really worries me, Andy, and I've got young kids that have interaction with young people, and it's actually a really good thing that alcohol usage amongst young people has actually been declining. I find my own children a lot more responsible. But here's the conversation that really nervouses me. We smoke some dope and use other drugs because otherwise we'll get caught random testing. In other words, at the moment, the bias of the system in having random alcohol testing but not for drugs is actually in the conversations of young people choosing one form of recreational drug over another's, and I think that's a mistake, and I think that's why it's important that you say these are equally serious impairments on driving, and both should be subject to random testing.
That's very helpful. Look, Nick and Karen, thank you very, very much. Sorry, Julianne, we've run out of time on this one, but I'll give you the first call next time.
Whew.
Who wants to go first?
Thanks for taking that job, not me.
All right. I like to take notes when I'm listening to people. So I want to respond to me and Nick. The fact of the matter is that all drugs, even prescription drugs, are mind-altering. That's how they work, right? All drugs are designed to alter your chemical response. But some of these drugs, in particular prescription medications, actually improve driving ability if they're used properly, like your ADHD medications and whatnot. Many people that are drug dependent, and this is why I'm a big advocate of public transport, need to utilize transport to get to work. So this is why I want to steelman Julian Genter's position, that we should be prioritizing public transport to minimize instances of drug driving and drunk driving as well. Because that was a real problem when it came to things like forestry, is quite often, well, I've got to go to work at like 4 a.m. in the morning. Let me just get hopped up on pee and drive to work. It's like that type of thing when you could just have a boss come and pick you up who's there are lots of things that can be done. Screening for drug driving is only one of the components of the solution, but not the sole key of the solution.
Rachel.
Like just talking about the political impasse that's existed for a very, very long time. That's to do with our political system, really, and because we have got a high population of drug users here and recreational drug users here. So that vote, the politicians are sensitive to that vote. I think one of the submissions said we've got like close to 1 million illicit drug users. So that's an election issue. That is something that is sensitive, and the politicians know it. There's also been a huge amount of deliberate clouding of the debate and obfuscation and filibustering carried out by people with good intentions in a way, but they're the legalisers, and I agree with them that they have an issue, but they seem to think that the whole thing of acknowledging drug driving as an issue will count against their political objectives. And so they've been very, very active to try and play the issue down. And they're quite politically astute. They have got people in their pockets. They tried to bribe me with a suitcase of money at one point.
Oh,
yeah.
Do tell.
Yeah. So I think that they're just exactly like the alcohol lobby. They have got politicians that are friendly to them. They're probably funding political parties as well. And that's a dynamic people aren't aware of. And our political system, being MMP, makes that ability for them to manipulate the politic very much easier. So I think that's why we're one of the last OECD countries that has not got saliva tests. I think about 20 other countries have, and we're at the bottom for road safety. We've got the second highest rate of deaths in 15 to 24-year-olds because of that, partly because of that, because we're not following best practice. So everyone else's deaths have dropped in the last few years for youth. Ours, I think, went up 65%. So there are victims in this. It's not just an ideological battle. There are people dying every year because we're dragging the tail, because we like our weed, we like our outrageous fortune characters. We've all got neighbours, cousins, friends, brothers. But we can't be pretending it's not an issue, because we are seeing the harm, and it's real harm. Public transport, yes, absolutely. I would love for my mum's killer to be only taking public transport. The problem is that a lot of the areas where these road deaths are concentrated, it's not the Hutt motorway, it's not Wellington. We've got safe roads.
Mm-hmm.
It's rural areas. It's It's young people needing to drive because they live in rural areas, and we've got an unsafe infrastructure, we've got unsafe roads, and we're not going to get safe roads because the big push that's been on for median dividers, the public are pushing against it.
You are right.
Oh, sorry, Sam. Go ahead.
Yeah, you are right about the median barriers. I know the first week that the Otaki to live in section of the median barrier got commissioned, it got hit 3 times. That's 3 head-on collisions that were avoided. But some people say, well, it's a failure. But to me, that's not a failure. That's a success. Including, I nearly lost a whole family of cousins, auntie, uncles. And a median barrier would have prevented what happened. And same with my former boss's wife. A median barrier would have prevented that head-on collision. In that case was also another drunk driver pushing her into oncoming traffic. And ironically, that section of road now has a median barrier down it, but it only has had it in there since in the last, I think since the expressway to Otaki opened, because it was at the passing lanes, southbound passing lanes just south of Forest Lakes.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of those things there, like I never got to know Vivian, my Lex's wife, because she was gone by the time I had my first job. But it was still very raw because it only happened less than a year before I started working there. So it's and a median barrier would have prevented Vivian and the oncoming cars crashing and killing. I'd say there's at least 3 people in that crash killed.
I'm familiar with Forest Lakes. I used to go there as a kid. So I know the road you're talking about. It is a very dangerous road. So, I mean, I totally agree with you, Rachel, about rural areas. That's where you see most of the crashes. Every day, I hear the damn siren going off all the time around here in Eketahuna. We've virtually got no public transport services in our district. That's how much of a problem it is. And we've got people who are elderly or people that, take medications for whatever purpose, and it can, some of these drugs can cause people to be fatigued, fatigued driving and stuff like that. And, they fly off the side of the hill, it's into Pukaha where my brother works. It's ridiculous how much could be potentially solved through improving our infrastructure and improving public transport.
It's just not going to happen. So we need to focus on driver fitness, and we will for a long time yet, because we're high income country, low wage country, and most of the first world are moving. They're setting legislation right now that within 5 years, all new cars have to have driver impairment prevention systems. We will not get the benefit of that here because our people cannot afford to buy spanking new high-tech cars.
We can't even get them to agree on having daytime running lights.
We need to catch up before we go forward. We're not even caught up with other people have been doing oral fluid testing for up to almost 20 years now. We haven't even got to step 1 before they're moving on to the next thing now. But they've had the benefits of that, and that's why their road tolls, they've had the benefits of that and evidence-based policy for quite a while, and that's why we've got these horrendous road tolls, and we're so isolated down here that people don't realise what the rest of the world's doing, and that it's actually quite normal, unlike what organisations like Normal are painting this as if it's some new thing that's really suspect and got heaps of problems, and it's not actually that at all. It's a common accepted road safety policy in most places in Europe, all around the world. Not just Australia, which is how Nick and things always mention Australia. That's just because they're close to us. It's actually being used. Most countries in the OECD have oral fluid testing in some form. It may not be random, but they're using it.
And for Dave, who's put on there, I drive my lights on. Whenever I'm doing long distance driving and I am driving in oncoming traffic lane, I always turn my lights on so the car coming the other direction can tell I'm driving towards them, not driving away from them. So that is what I always do. And if I see something happening the other direction, my first demand is turn the lights on so the car coming the other direction knows, oh, heck. little safety things there. That's just me, and that's just me. And the interesting thing is the headlights. If you drive your headlights on, you're 30% less likely to have a head-on collision.
That is true. Yes, that is true.
I'll be honest, I don't do that around the city. I only tend to do it when I drive north of Otaki or north of Masterton.
Yeah. What did you, Rachel? I have so many questions because in regards to some of the data that Julian Genter brought up in the debate. I know you haven't seen the debates, but I was just wondering maybe if you had a clue of what she could be referring to. But she said that, and I'll quote her, contributing factors for fatal and serious injury crashes from a 10-year period from 2014 to 2024, overwhelmingly the vast majority is from alcohol. It's 56.6%, a huge contributing factor. The next biggest factor to be fatal in serious injury crashes is inappropriate speed at 30%. Of course, after that is 10% is attributed to loss of control, and usually loss of control is often related to driving at a speed that is higher than safe. So if we go down, drug suspected or confirmed is 7%.
No,
So
they've got a form that the police fill out that goes into the crash analysis system, and it weights speed, alcohol, and lack of seatbelt are given an extra weighting.
Right.
So
okay.
It's called the greatest enforceable risk policy. So it's really a monitoring and evaluation tool to see, because we're very enforcement based, our road safety. It's the key cornerstone of our policy. So what that actually does is it invisibilizes other causes like fatigue, drowsy driving, and all that, because if there's two of those factors in a crash, they put it in the alcohol or they put it in the speed.
Right. Okay.
So the actual counting system is called the jelly bean system. That's what we call it.
Yep.
Our unofficial little joke name for it, because it's not funny, but we call it the jelly bean because they get the coloured jelly beans, and the colours they like speed and alcohol, it makes them look good, and it gives them a justification to keep on getting money to spend enforcing those things. So it's not actually a proper reflection of the attributable causes. Yeah.
I do know the late Bruce Sidney Flavin, it's a shame he's not alive because he would actually be quite intriguing to put this on there, said that one mistake that could happen with deciding if it's an alcohol-related crash, because he owned a distillery, was driving with alcohol in the vehicle and it gets damaged, but the person wasn't had no alcohol in their system, but that would be still misclassified as an alcohol-related crash. Has that been tidied up, or is that still happening?
It's basically just looking at the content of the blood. They're not looking at when they're classing, like the ESR are the definitive studies, because they're looking at the drugs and alcohol in people's blood, and those are saying that drugs and alcohol are running neck and neck. With youth, it's more a combination or more drugs. With people under, because they've got the zero alcohol limit, so it's more drugs with youth. And that's where our big, huge increase in road toll is, because taking away the alcohol, they've just shifted to other stuff, which Nick touched on that. But where was I going with that? Oh, yes. No, it's really complicated to be able to attribute a crash to one cause. There's usually a few causes. So the impact of alcohol or drug may cause you to not deal so well with bad weather, because cannabis causes blurry vision. When at night vision is affected with cannabis, reactions and things matter more when it's wet. So there's multiple causes to any crash, but they set the alcohol limit worldwide years ago when the limit was brought in was 0.08. And the reason for that is when they looked at culpability crashes, even though people aren't extremely impaired at 0.08, and the majority of alcohol-related crashes were at double that amount, they could actually see from culpability studies looking at whether they'd done a major contribution in their behaviour to the crash, that at 0.08, this is how they set that limit, not because people were really impaired, but at 0.08, they could make a legal case that over half of people had done something really stupid who had died. Who had died, over half. It was about 52%. So they're like, 52% of people at 0.08, definitely the alcohol caused them to die. you know.
Okay.
What is our current law limit on that one at the moment? Because I know it is 250 and 400, but that's based on
We've got a soft limit like the rest of the world, a soft limit of 0.05. So that's mild impairment. It's pretty mild. And that's just what they're going to do with the drug driving, which is it's a ticket, it's demerits, it's a fine. It's not criminal. It's not criminal. So it's like, hey, you're getting a little bit risky here. Please don't do that. But if you do, we're not going to criminalise you. We just want to try.
Which that actually matches up with, as you say, 0.05 matches with the
what they're doing
250. Yeah, which is the new limit. Yeah, because I know someone who was in between, was exactly 400, and somehow managed to get the 250 to 400 punishment, not the 400 plus.
The breathalyzer test, just the same as the oral fluid. They're not 100%. So you need to have a blood test, and that was what a few people submitted on, because for some bizarre reason, the blood test was added in because the prior law was judged by the Attorney General as possibly breaching the Bill of Rights because it's presuming people guilty when we know there's a small error rate. It's bigger with drugs. It's a bigger error rate for a false negative, but there's a small error rate of about 1%, and that's been misreported. And actually, Judith Collins in her report said 5%, and she's incorrect, which has caused a lot of people to get all stirred up and go, "Oh, there's all these innocent people going to get fined and get demerits." She's actually confused her references. We've gone and checked her references, and she's incorrect about 5%. There'll be a 1% false positive rate, and the thing is that the previous advice was to put in a blood test. You can request a blood test the same as with a breathalyzer check. That's fair. And that was needed to bring it more compliant with the Bill of Rights. This bill takes that away. So several people submitted that we need to allow people the right to a blood test, because even though it's not criminal, it's still a little black mark on your record. You get demerits. That amount of demerits could be the final demerits you've got before you lose your license. So so we need that ability to blood test to bring it, to make it consistent in fairness, just in fairness with the alcohol legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
Point.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, because I have looked at the data that I was able to get my hands on. It is very difficult to put driver deaths down to one cause. You can't do it because there are some drugs that cause fatigue. There are different reasons for fatigue, different reasons for driver distraction, different reasons. Drugs can be a contributing factor. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a point that, to be fair to Julianne, she did bring up at some point. But
she probably was trying to bring that up with Nick.
Yeah, I'd have to go over my notes, but I think I do recall her going mentioning that.
She asked, can we divide up? I do remember her. She asked, can we divide it up to how many of, like Nick said, we're going to save half the drug drivers from dying, which would be 50 people a year. And she said, are you sure? Because can you say that all those crashes were caused by the drugs? Now it's going to vary. It's going to vary because this is where people just epidemiology is very important. So it depends how many people are using a drug, plus also how impairing that drug is. So methamphetamine is more impairing than cannabis. It's like about 10 times crash risk approximately on a normal driver. But if you've only got very few people using methamphetamine, like 1% of people, that may cause the same number of crashes as if you've got 5% of people stoned on cannabis, because the cannabis may be only 3 times the risk, the methamphetamine's 10 times the risk, but it's also about how many people are using it to arrive at the figure of their share of the toll.
I would love to, if you're able to share any data or anything, I would love to look at that. I love looking at data.
Well, I mean, we tried to do an assessment of the attributable risk based on the prevalence of drug use in drivers in New Zealand and the risks of those particular drugs. And I think Nick's actually hit it about right, because any policy, you're not going to get everybody to stop doing the behaviour. And
no.
One issue they're having in Australia, where they've evaluated the things, they've said that it is saving lives, but they need to get a substantial life saving, the same as we did with the alcohol legislation, because it hasn't saved as many lives as alcohol legislation did. But to boost that, there needs to be a much higher level of testing and a belief among young people that they're going to face a test, because they haven't been doing enough. And so there were 2 evaluations done of Victoria and Queensland recently, and the recommendations by Monash University and the Auditor General was that they need to basically double the amount of tests they're doing, because it's working, but they need to get more benefit, more cost benefit from what they're doing.
I'm sorry, Rachel, I just got to address one chatter. Dave, I am pro cannabis. I'm pro marijuana legalization. I think you are being quite unfair. What I'm doing is I'm just asking Rachel some questions. I don't necessarily agree with every single point that she's putting forward. I'm just being polite and hearing her out. Okay? So, dude, don't do that.
Gee, you saved me a job there. The next submission that I've got on the notes here was about support of the bill, which is just after Nick Smith. That also has a bunch of questions associated with it. Should we proceed? Which that would be
for the next one. So thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Andy.
Sarah, and thoughts with you too.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got advanced diagnostics on Zoom.
Yeah.
Oh, not on Zoom, right? Here, yes, right. Okay, right. Okay, CK.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank
Again,
you.
you know the order of service, so away you go.
Awesome, thank you. I'm CK, representing Advanced Diagnostics, which has been providing solutions for drug and alcohol screening for the last 20 years. I'm also a member of the Australian-New Zealand Joint Standards Committee, which has been responsible for bringing about the Australian-New Zealand Standard 4760, which has also been talked about in this drug driving amendment bill. I'm also a member of the associate member of the Australasian Medical Review Officers, so we understand from the toxicology point of view. Advanced diagnostics, since it deals with the screening products, we understand what makes the product work better. We have understanding of the different tools available in the market, and 2 of the tools that were being used by last government were also something that we support with. I strongly support this bill because it is a step forward in preventing accidents like what happened with Matthew Dow. 1 death is way too many, and if we can reduce it to half, that would be a great support to what Nick had just said. What I'm proposing is our recommendation is to raise the cutoff limits, because the Minister of Transport should have the ability to increase the cutoff limits at which the screening is going to be done. Everyone is a little worried about that they're going to be wrongly accused or be penalized for something they have taken in the past as a medication or have some residual stuff left in their system. So if you increase that cutoff, you are looking at the higher concentration of drugs in the person driving. And that eliminates the consequences of that is we are not penalizing people, those who have low levels, or which is not actually causing impairment on the road. So that power of increasing the cutoff will help the government to get the support from the public.
What's happened there? Sorry, hang on just a moment.
Also,
sorry, just hold. Sorry, we just lost the entire panel there, so we just don't need to be talking when nobody's there. Right, okay, carry on.
So where do I start from?
No, that was okay, it was just momentarily.
Yeah.
Sorry, we just lost the entire panel there, so couldn't see any of you and didn't know whether any of you could actually hear what was going on. It says signal lost, so yeah, good, right, okay.
So this will consequently lead to decreased causes of the false positives that we're so worried about, and the focus will mainly be on keeping our roads safe from the people who are highly impaired from drug driving. So managing the risk in an effective way, so situations like Matthew Dow don't happen again. My children drive on the road and I want them to be safe as well, and so does everyone else. Whatever can be done to mitigate this is important. And my second recommendation is, instead of having a whole panel as what the Australian New Zealand standard stipulates 5 classes of drugs, We, on the roadside drug testing, don't need that extended testing panel that includes opiates, because that is the major cause of prescription. But we focus on the drugs that really affect the driving, and those being methamphetamine, cannabis, and in some jurisdictions, they're beginning to have a conversation around cocaine. As we can see in our wastewater studies, the use of cocaine is increasing in New Zealand too. So aiming at those drugs that can hardly impair the drivers, we want to create a deterrent for those, and that's what Advanced Diagnostics completely supports this bill. In order to bring this practicality in police enforcing this, you make the cutoffs higher and you limit to the drugs that will cause the most impairment on the road. I'm open to your questions.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, CK. Questions? I've got Tangi first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that, and thank you for the clarity around why your submission seeks to basically removes amphetamines and opioids. So there is a provision at the moment for a medical exemption process. There might be others that are captured outside of the amphetamines and opioids that still might be individuals that utilise for medical purposes, such as THC. So how do you see that aligning with what's currently in the bill in terms of that medical exemption process?
Sure. THC, the medical cannabis, has two elements in it, the CBD and THC. The CBD is a therapeutic side and the THC is a psychoactive side. The roadside drug testing is not looking for the CBD element, it is looking for THC. However, if people are taking medical cannabis, the medical cannabis doctors can prescribe them, which might include some amount of CBD, might still have some amount of THC. That doesn't mean that if my doctor has prescribed me to take 30 milligrams of cannabis every day, which is 5 times a normal joint, that's okay for me to drive on the pretext of medical grounds. So if medication is given, the doctors also have the obligation to say that they should not be driving for a certain number of hours because the impairment can occur. And even if they're taking a pure form of CBD, Tangi, which is 98% CBD and 2% of cannabis, a 25 milligram dose of that with 6 mil maximum will create a 3 milligram of THC element because it still comes from that plant, and 0.02 will still be available in that CBD medication as a THC. And a normal joint is 7.5 milligram. So if my CBD medication is giving me 3 milligram of taking the maximum dose, and if I'm keeping to that limit, that's good. But if I'm exceeding that limit, if I'm causing impairment on the road, then somebody should be watching over me. And the medical cannabis is not something going to be detected by the police. It is the psychoactive element, the THC, which will be measured. And that fear of anything medical still has some impairment effects that can happen. Hope I answered, Tangi. Is that?
Thanks.
Thanks, CK. I think there's quite a lot of numbers in there and relationships between doing things. We will pick those up so we can actually get
anytime. If you want me to pick up and come back to you later on anything, that would be fine.
No, look, that's okay. So I don't see any other questions there on the board, but so can you just tell us a little bit more about Advanced Diagnostics and what you actually do in terms of that?
Yeah. So we help in workplaces manage risk around drug and alcohol. And that is through education, through training, through tools of empowerment so they can manage the risk in the workplaces. Because what we're dealing with at the road is similarly what people grapple in the workplaces. We provide breathalyzers, we provide oral fluid drug screening and urine drug screening. They're all the 3 different matrices in which the workplaces can keep their safety. So that's our area of expertise.
Cool. So then can I ask you then, just to follow up to that, just the reliable, because one of the issues you started off with is essentially the reliability of the tests. Have you just got any comments on, there are clearly several different paths that can be used?
Yes.
Just some observations of what works, and what's risky in terms of accuracy.
So the most important thing in any screening device are those 3 things: the accuracy, specificity, and sensitivity. Sensitivity is to check that it'll detect what you meant to detect. And specificity is about it will not detect something that you shouldn't detect. So to avoid false positives. Now, any screening device, when we started doing rat testing in New Zealand, we had the same issue. Any screening device will have its pitfalls. There will never be a 100% foolproof system. But screening helped us to mitigate many other things. And therefore, raising that cutoff, not keeping it here, but just lifting it a little bit more. So we are preventing those false positive results, which have come because of any cross-reactivity of the medication or some residual use from the previous thing, which does not impair them. That lifting of the cutoff number will allow to manage to get a better result in roadside drug testing with reliability.
Can you just say, so raising that, so is this the same, this is the same bit of equipment, testing equipment that you raise the setting on? Is that what you do?
So currently the Australian New Zealand standard has set a minimum bar. This is what detection level should be. The devices should be detecting, for example, cannabis at 15 nanogram per mil. That is what the standard stipulates. But if we're going to have the screening devices for roadside testing, that device for cannabis should not be at 15. It should be at a higher number, say supposing if it's 50, because it could be a number that could be agreed with the expert panel in the toxicology. If that was at 50 instead of 15, you've eliminated those false positives which could occur from just the use of the drug without causing impairment. And therefore, the system will be a lot more effective. It will be efficiency in the performance, and people will have faith in the system that it is doing what it's doing. Because currently your bill is supporting 2 screenings and then supported by confirmation. And the confirmation can still be continued at what the standards have decided the number. The confirmation for cannabis, for example, is 5 nanogram. That means we're only penalizing, but that number got arrived by thinking that if you had that much level of drugs in your saliva, that's when you could be affected for fitness for work. Impairment is a very critical word, but fitness for work suits the best.
I think we've got our point from there. That was a very interesting submission. Thanks for pointing that out, Rachel, in the notes that it puts some interesting aspects in it talking about limits.
Well, the problem is that what she's proposing it because of the straw man that is in the Attorney General's report of a 5% false positive rate, which is incorrect, because all the studies I can find about Australia and overseas show a 0.8% false positive rate, which is in line with breathalyzers taking people over the limit when they were actually under the limit. It's also around about 1%. So I think this is actually not the issue they're saying it is, but also the solution that she's proposing doesn't make sense scientifically, because the oral fluid testing cutoff for roadside tests in Europe is actually at 5 nanograms, even though the Australian New Zealand standard is 15. The Australian roadside test drug wipe, which has not a high false positive, but a slightly gnarly false negative of, I think it's around 5%, they're set at 10 nanograms. She's proposing going higher than 15 nanograms for saliva. Now, if we went to 20, there'd be a 25% false negative rate. Not okay for road safety. So I think her solution hasn't been thought through, or she hasn't done her homework. She's just thrown it out there thinking that will help the supposed issue of false positives, which we totally question is actually even real. I think it might just be a spanner that people are trying to throw into the works to again prevent this legislation moving forward.
Laura?
I have to be careful when I talk about cannabis because it's not a strong point of mine. I don't smoke cannabis, for the record. I'm just in favour of legalisation because of bodily autonomy reasons. But one thing I have noticed is that she seems to be conflating CBD with, recreational marijuana use. And I do find that to be quite problematic as well, because I did look at a paper while she was talking, and it doesn't seem to be much in terms of evidence that CBD oil, when it's prescribed, right, taken at the prescribed amount actually impacts driving negatively. It might cause in some people some drowsiness, but overall, like as in, it causes you to drive crazy, you know, like in slow motion or whatever. Again, I'm not a smoker, guys. I don't know. So I'm going to be transparent about that. But yeah, I the evidence that that is dangerous when given at the prescribed dosage, I haven't seen much of that.
No, I think she was saying that's not the psychoactive component. If I heard her correctly, I thought she said they're looking at the delta-9, the active THC. But in the tests, you actually need to test for 2 analytes in the oral fluid test. You need to test for the delta-9 THC and the CBD, because it's that combination that actually shows recent use. And recent use is what creates a nexus between oral fluid and the blood test being over the limits we're setting, and which are themselves at 2 nanograms, 3 nanograms, 5. We're at 3 nanograms. At 5 below 2 nanograms in the blood, you are not impaired. That's historic use. Over that, you could be impaired at 3. You're definitely at 5. You could be. There's no doubt that you're probably been impaired on the road. So we've got this non-criminal limit of 3 nanograms. We've got a criminal limit of 5 nanograms. So it's actually that this is where the testing science really confuses people, because the oral fluid test around the world, some of them test for different analytes. There's 4 or 5, I think, different analytes of cannabis they can test for, and it's actually important to test for the correct analytes that show recent use, and also to get that cut-off point right, so that you are catching people and you're not losing too many people that are impaired. Because there is a correlation between the oral fluid and the blood. And also, if you add in carboxyl cannabis, which is the one that is THCCOOH, that adding in that one will also prevent the pickup of anyone who has passively smoked, because that shows long term, you know, that it's something that you've taken into your body, and it's processed and turned into this other thing. So the testing science is confusing. I wish that more people, it could be explained and there was a public education campaign on it, so that people understand what it is capable of, what it isn't capable of, and what it means. The problem with that is it's really complicated. It's really complicated.
It is quite complex. Looking over some of the research. One point that I see because people are like saying, oh, in the chat, it's like, oh, this podcast was biased, you know, and there's not enough pushback. What are you sure that cannabis causes blurry vision? I mean, because I can go out and ask my dad. He's at home. He's an optometrist. I can always go double check with him.
Not blurry vision. It causes glare at night time. It causes seeing lights at night time. There's an extra flare and glare around the lights, which is a road safety vision issue. So the tests for cannabis impairment on the road, they're different to alcohol because they're different drugs. So there's different effects that actually affect the driving. So giving someone a standardized field test where they stand on one leg and do these types of things, they're looking for alcohol impairment, behavioral effects of alcohol, psychomotor effects of alcohol. They're not looking for impairments that affect other drugs so well. The test was created to detect gross alcohol impairment. So people that are showing up on simulators as having impairments that affect driving that are specific to cannabis can often fly through a standardized field test, which is why when cannabis users are normal are always proposing, let's just use the field test. It doesn't work for cannabis. It doesn't work well for cannabis. The majority of people who are highly impaired on cannabis can pass it, but they're not safe to be on the road. And in fact, a lot of people who are quite impaired on alcohol can pass it. The field test is beloved of Americans because they have a very lax attitude to impaired driving, and they want to drive, and they do drive very drunk. They've got different culture to us, different standards, and they have a massively high impaired alcohol road toll because of their attitude to all this. So they're very legalistic about you have to prove 100% that I was absolutely sozzled and I failed a field test and my alcohol's super high and blah, blah, blah. So like they've got all these defence lawyers that will just use everything they can because they don't actually care about road safety.
Right. Okay.
Applying their model to try and help us is kind of like taking poison to fix an ailment.
Well, yeah. I mean, when it comes to America, right, the bar is on the floor when it comes to America.
Exactly.
A random thing out of America is when it comes to drink driving, the licensee who sold the alcohol can be prosecuted in some states for drink driving, which is completely
I'm not surprised. I didn't know that. I'm not surprised.
Personal responsibility.
Someone has to pay. It's America. Someone has to pay.
Oh, exactly. Like that is in some states, which I completely disagree with. But that's just like, here's an example of a ludicrous standard in the United States that, thank goodness, we don't have in New Zealand. I mean, imagine if you had a pharmacist who dispensed the legal cannabis on prescription from the doctor. Imagine if they both got hauled into the court because of a drug-related accident.
Yeah, I mean,
as a United States example.
I mean, don't we have something similar in New Zealand that if you serve alcohol to someone that's intoxicated, you can be prosecuted or fined?
Yes, that is the law, but you cannot be prosecuted, say, for drink driving.
I see. Yeah, okay.
Or as encouraging drink driving. I mean, as a licensee, you have a bunch of rules in there. In the urban areas, it's public transports and taxis. In the rural areas, it's courtesy vans, that sort of thing there. But it is basically, there are standards in there. But having those things available covers your ass legally speaking. And I remember all the rules from the Distillery of Bruce. And, I mean, I did have a liquor license for 4.5 years. So I know some of the rules in there. And, it's quite intriguing.
Hello, I've got a guest here.
Oh, what's his name?
His name's Biggie. What have you been up to? Hello. Hopefully they'll make the chat a bit more happier with me.
Well, we need these human side of things there. Well, I think we've hit our 1 hour limit, which is the agreement with Rachel. I'm
happy to carry on if anyone wants to carry on. I'm happy.
I'm happy to carry on. I mean, most of what I'm going to be asking, most of what I'm going to be doing is asking questions because this is a really interesting topic. It's not one that I have a lot of knowledge in. And like I said before, it's like I'm doing everything I can to, be polite and ask and learn because the stuff I will probably go back and have a look at other data. And that's why I asked before. It's like I'd love to know of any papers or anything that you'd recommend that one could read or, got any sources or citations or anything. I'm
just looking at the notes are on there. The Medical Cannabis Council at 122 minutes. Should we have a look at their submission?
Sure.
Okay. Now that's where I've got to get... The annoying thing is, sometimes when they do these streams, they tidy up the streams, and at other times, they make it where I've got to basically boost it. So whoever was governing the stream this time made our job a lot harder. Yep, here we are. Okay, so we'll get back to panel screen.
My mistake.
That's all
Just
good.
trying to go pretty quickly. Council. Okay. In your hands, you.
Thank you
I'll go
so
down there
much.
for 10 minutes. So.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Sally King. I am the Executive Director of the New Zealand Medicinal Cannabis Council. I think Hayley was quite a useful foil for my conversation, and I do want to put a face to medicinal cannabis users in New Zealand. Just imagine, if you will, you have finished a chemo treatment on Friday, and on Monday you're taking your non-driving mum and your toddler, mum to the airport, your toddler to daycare, and you're outside of Pukekawa and you get stopped for a random drug testing moment. The night before, you had taken a prescribed medical cannabis dose and you test positive, and you test positive twice. And what happens then is you are immediately forbidden to drive and your keys are taken away. And those keys are away for 12 hours. So you followed your doctor's instructions to the letter. There's no impairment. You certainly wouldn't be driving your mother and your toddler if there was. It's pretty presumptive of the state to think they know better than the doctors and indeed yourself as to whether or not you're impaired. A 12-hour ban on driving without proof of impairment is a very significant penalty. The impact of this penalty on lives and livelihoods is barely mentioned in the cost-benefit analysis I have read. And it's damned important. It's very costly to you, your toddler, your mum, the friend who has to come and pick you up, who closes her shop so that she can get your mum to the airport. To say nothing of the embarrassment, the stress, and the injustice. Taking your keys, if you are impaired, is entirely justified. But it's an inexcusable intrusion on your day if you're not. And I think we've underplayed it in this particular conversation. The impact of the removal of your capacity to drive for 12 hours when taking a legal prescription. Now, this isn't only true for medicinal cannabis users, it's true for everybody taking prescription medicine in accordance with their doctor's advice. That's to say nothing of the fact that we know that there's a high random drug testing undertaken somewhere between 2.5, if we do 50,000 tests, 2.5 to 5,000 people will be subject to this intrusion on their lives because of the false positives. And a punitive 12-hour driving ban imposed on patients who are taking medication as they are instructed by their prescriber impacts reputation, it impacts livelihoods, it impacts childcare, it impacts insurance, it impacts employment, is particularly discriminatory to the disabled because they don't have other transport alternatives, and to those who live in rural areas. The tests don't detect impairment, they detect presence. We've heard about that quite a lot. And medicinal cannabis patients are not trying to get high, they're just wanting to function. We would ask that the tests include not just 2 tests for saliva and evidence. One test for saliva would take you to a test for a compulsory impairment test, a CIT perhaps, to genuinely evidence that there is impairment. But for those medicinal cannabis patients who are taking their medication as prescribed, there has to be a robust defence in law that removes this 12-hour penalty for the fair use of their medicines as they are prescribed by their doctor. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sally. We've got about 5 and a bit minutes, so questions, colleagues, if there are any. So look, if I'll kick one off anyway. It's just that, what you're suggesting is a different test pathway. So you're not saying it's not an issue, but really what you're trying to do is avoid the false positive outcomes. Okay.
I'm proposing.
So you're suggesting a different test pathway. Can you just walk us through that pathway that you're suggesting and what value oral tests might have in that pathway?
What I'm proposing is that if a medicinal cannabis patient is in a random drug testing environment, that they do have a first saliva test. If that should prove to be that there is evidence of use of medicinal cannabis or indeed any of the other 19 prescription medicines that will be brought up on a testing screen, that person then undertakes a compared or some kind of field sobriety test. It would have to be probably a reduced model because it's quite a long test, but an opportunity for there to be evidence that there is indeed impairment before there is infringement notice or a 12-hour ban on driving.
So effectively, it's a pathway to a CIT test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we should bear in mind here is that, you know, the CIT, no one wants to see any further impaired driving, certainly not medicinal cannabis users.
So just before I go to Cam, so you're still seeing value in the oral test, but only as a
screening mechanism.
Gateway, screening mechanism. Okay.
I am.
And then is there any value in having a lab test as part of all of that process?
Certainly.
Yeah.
If there is impairment, they shouldn't be driving.
Okay, right, thanks. Cam?
Hey, yeah, thank you. I just picked up on something you said, a robust defence in law. How would you see an exemption, perhaps, scheme working, like without muddying the waters, like say something on the back of a licence or a certificate from a doctor that you carry around with you? What are you envisioning there?
I'm envisaging that the police would be able to ask for evidence of a valid prescription. The method that Hayley suggested, which is on a phone, rather than carrying around a medicine, probably would work. That the police would take that into consideration, and that if they didn't feel there was any impairment, but it had shown up in the test that there might be, if they felt there was impairment, then clearly a CIT or a field sobriety test would be entirely appropriate. But if not, they should be able to go on their way.
So, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, just sounds great, but it doesn't sound super robust. You're saying, just if you can show your prescription, then you don't need to be tested. Is that what I'm hearing?
No.
Okay.
I'm saying if you can show your prescription and you don't appear to be impaired, then the police will give you the benefit of the doubt that you are taking your medication accurately and correctly, and let you go on your way. If by some chance you look impaired, then they should undertake a test that will permit them to see that there is indeed impairment rather than evidence of use.
Okay, thank you.
Because, so the last part, sorry, I was just sorting out the proceeds from here on. But the part of that there is if you say, well, here's my prescription, you're saying it's got to be taken on faith that you've actually met the terms of the prescription. Otherwise, you haven't driven within 6 hours, for example. Yeah.
I think
but
you can
if you looked
reasonably...
impaired, then you go, hang on, I'm still going to test you.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have 600,000 people or more in New Zealand taking prescription medicines that are impairing. Are we taking the view that none of those people are capable of following their doctor's instructions?
Yeah. Right. That's very helpful. Any other questions, team? No, Sally, thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
That was an interesting submission. It's a bit in all sorts of different directions. I mean, one thing I definitely can say is when I last got breath tested, before they did my breath test, they had to scan my driver's license to check if I had a zero alcohol limit or not. Something like that could also be logged onto that same system.
Mm.
You know, because then you've got the verification that can be checked with that. It's not like, you know, the prescription pad sitting in the car. You know, there are tools out there.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like some of what she said. The idea of like having something on your phone to say, hey, I have a legal prescription. It's not impairing my ability to drive. You know, do we need to go ahead with tests? Versus like, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
How do you prevent people faking them? That is an excellent question.
Point.
That's an excellent question, and that is something that will definitely need to be debated, and something I will need to do some research into for sure. But yes, that is a really good question.
COVID vaccination passes. That was a classic example of, well, what happens if someone was using someone else's pass on the phone?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that was something. So we've had a system in place now. I actually, thank goodness, I hadn't had times where I had to show both my IDs to get it, but there were people who are known for doing that, going through, showing up with other people's vaccination passes when they weren't vaccinated to get around the system. And if you weren't going to a licensed bar, you weren't likely to be asked to see your an ID. So that would be, it's like, well, what steps do you sit and do it? But like, as I said before, you could scan the driver's license, and that could actually be verified, that information, along with the, because I do know certain prescriptions, they do database them with your NHI number, because I know one of the prescriptions I get, because it's got a special authority number, it's got to say exactly which doctor prescribes it, which pharmacy picks it up, which pharmacy I pick it up from.
I think it's a really pragmatic idea to have something like that to prevent it elevating to courts, so that officers can use their discretion and apply some kind of impairment test. But I don't agree with this. She's proposing the CIT field test, because we know they don't work for cannabis. We had a few submissions from MedPot users, and they are told with their prescription that they may not be safe to drive for 6 hours, which is the exact window that oral fluid will catch someone who is a regular user. It could be up to 6 hours. Most people, if they're recreational and they just, have a weekend joint, they won't show positive on oral fluid after 2 to 3 hours, but it is 6 hours for regular users. Very few would go positive on an oral test after 6 hours. But with the CIT, 60% of people who are quite impaired on cannabis on a driving simulator can pass a standardized field test. So that's just not a go. But some of the submitters brought up a new technology, and I'm trying to remember what it was called, alertometer. I think it was alertometer. It was actually brought up in the normal submission. One of the rare things that they've said that I've actually liked, because I disagree with most of their submissions. But there is something called an alertometer, which I looked it up, and it actually looks like it's pretty good. I don't think it's been applied in a roadside enforcement framework before. But if that was to be used for medical users, I think that would be quite innovative and useful for us. And it's something like a 60-second test. But the question with some of these things is that you may need to have a baseline from when the person was sober. So I don't know whether you need that with this alertometer thing or not. It's being used in workplaces, which is a good endorsement. It's quite widely used, apparently. There was another app that they were talking about that I looked into that didn't sound very good, called the Druid app, because you needed a baseline, and it had some issues. But I think she's going in the right direction. We do need some protection for medical users. They're more likely to have a bit of a tolerance and be able to drive safely because they're used to using. And also, they're far better to be having their medications when it's being taken for a proper reason, and they're not taking it to get high. Not taking it to get high, and they don't have much THC, active THC, in the script anyway. So, they're not really a concern. They're someone that we should be supporting and removing any fear of this law, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, at least they're not a threat to other drivers. That's the priority here, is getting.
Yeah. And a lot of medicinal cannabis users, they're not driving, because I'm an ex-nurse and I used to administer hashish and medical cannabis to people when I was working overseas before it was legalized here. And they're not driving. I mean, they're people with MS and stuff that are bedbound, a lot of them.
Or they're probably medically not cleared to drive. And I mean, I know that because I personally, because I've got an HT, I have to go through tests, and the one I always love about is the eyesight test, because if you get a truck driver's medical, you don't have to do this hideous eyesight test at the AA or the VTNZ.
I feel like the committee was sympathetic to those views, the medical cannabis users, so they may actually achieve something with these submissions. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what's in the select committee report. It's
okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of room here for innovation and adaptation. like things can be improved, different ideas can be brought to the table. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Comes down to the advisors, though. It comes down to the advisors because they're rushing legislation through this government.
Yes.
So are they going to just pause and look for these nice little bells and whistles, or are they just going to rush, That's
what
are they going to have Uncle Andy go, please watch this submission like we've just done again, or something like that?
I think a lot of the time this stuff is so complicated that the MPs just tune out. They say to the policy advisors, what do you think? And the policy advisors are new to this. I've seen in my time about 4 changes of guard with new policy advisors. So, you get them honed up and then they leave and they move somewhere else. And then you've got a new lot that are completely green. And then they're advising the MPs. And it's just a bit of I don't know what you call it, chaos, really.
Well, especially when things keep chopping and changing often. I mean, put it this way. Maybe they need to have someone too good who was on It's in the Bag from running the show from when it first went on radio 1954 until 1987. Will they end up having a policy advisor like that? I mean,
It's a bit like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think the US version of that, his name was called Dr. Fauci. Because he was like a policy advisor back before Ronald Reagan was president. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of. I'm just looking on there of on. Going on there.
Can I hold up while you're thinking? Can I just hold up something, because all of this is unbalanced, I'll admit it to the people that complain, because we haven't got a big, strong cannabis advocate here. But I think we're just trying to get an overview of the select committee here, and this is who you've got. So there were a few submissions that were incorrect, saying that the random testing hasn't saved lives over there. I just want to hold this bit of paper up, which is the Auditor General's report on how it's been working and what they think ramping up their tests can do. So I don't know.
I'll just maximise your screen.
It's upside down.
Heck, your camera's a bit blurry. That's the only thing. So it's not showing details in there. But if
never mind, I'll just read it out. It just says that that between 2013 and 2014, the Victorian test prevented 33 fatal crashes a year, which is more lives because fatal crashes often take more than one life, 80 serious injury crashes a year, and that they recommended that by ramping it up with an extra 100,000 tests, that will save an additional 52 serious injury crashes and 21 fatal injury crashes. So this is what the reviews are saying. They're not saying that the policies have failed. They say they're working, but there's not enough deterrence because there's not enough tests being done. They're a tiny fraction of the amount of breathalyzer alcohol checks that are done. And you have to have that certainty that there's a risk of being pinged to actually achieve any behaviour change.
In Australia, don't they do every time I've watched the Australian cop shows, whenever they've done a drug test, the person's outside the vehicle. They're never in the vehicle to do the drug test.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something in there. Like, is the testing itself like breath test? You can basically put a line of cars up there, sit down there, breathalyze. You can sit down there. You can have 30 seconds, and if you have 4 breathalyzers, you have 4 cars in a row, you get 4 cars through the queue. But when it comes, but
it does take 5 minutes. So perhaps I just think maybe they're taking the opportunity to try and look at whether they're looking physically impaired when they get them out of the car. They might just be using that chance to give them a once over. I don't know. I really don't know the reason, but maybe people just want to stretch their legs if they're going to be parked for 5 minutes. That other aspect. 5 minutes for a negative test, obviously longer if it's going to lead to the second test. And somebody on the questions asked why, if someone's going to fail a field test, what's the point of doing a confirming test? That's to confirm that it's not a false positive. They haven't like tested positive for methamphetamine and then failed a field test because they've taken cough mixture. So the second test will confirm, it's a lab test of oral fluid that will confirm that the initial screening test was correct.
And the same thing is done with rapid HIV tests, that if you get a positive, you tend to, on the RAT test, you tend to get a second test done before they would sit there and refer it to the next stage, which is a blood test, which I do know that, considering up until I went on PrEP, that was how I did my HIV test, because I hate needles. So, you know, I definitely know that HIV test, and with COVID, which used a newer version, the same type of test, but adapted for a different compound, they recommended if you had a positive test, you do a second test to make sure that you had two positives before you had it confirmed as a positive diagnosis. Which I do know that because I've twice been in the situation of a household where the house got COVID, but I managed to avoid it. Don't ask me why. I still don't know why, and on both occasions I was daily testing. So, yeah.
I don't understand benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry. Sorry, Kiwi Skirt, I don't quite get your question still. Yeah.
Let's see if I can steelman their question. I think she's referring to prescription marijuana, that if they're not impaired, then the benefit of the doubt can be given to them if they have a prescription, because they're following they're taking the prescribed amount given to them by the doctor. So do we need to do a lab test?
That would possibly be.
I think that would only kick in if they test the first oral test, the screening test was a positive, then they pull out and show their card to say I'm a medical user or whatever, and then what the Medical Cannabis Society is recommending would happen then is that there is a actual test for impairment that's a practical test rather than a body fluid test. So there would be some short roadside test. They said field test, meaning stand on one leg and follow my finger and all that kind of jazz. Where other people made submissions for MedPop that it should be some kind of a device that you can show that you're not impaired by, I don't know, doing puzzles or whatever. And so then if you were impaired on that device, then they would go to the second lab oral fluid test to show that it quantifies that the cannabis is there, the particular analytes that are impairing are there, and that it's over that level that would, or they'll go to a blood one under the previous amendment, but under the new amendment, they're trying to take away the right to the blood test when you really do need to get that blood confirmation, because the second oral fluid test will give a pretty good indication that you're over the limit in your blood, but it's not 100% again. So that is why if you failed that little extra test for impairment, a physical test, then it would move into getting stronger evidence from body fluids.
Okay, so the test would be conducted if they showed signs of impairment. That's when you would do the oral swab test. Or you do the oral test first.
I'll do the test first. Because a lot of medical users may pass the oral fluid test.
Yep.
The oral fluid test is indicating that your levels are probably quite high. So then it would be a CIT to see if that's actually in reality causing you to be quite impaired. And then a second oral fluid and or blood test if you want to elect that, which they're trying to take away that right to the blood test. Yeah.
Let's say I come up to a road stop test, right? Roadside test, and I go, look, hey, I take prescription marijuana. Here's my card. Do I still have to do a second test? They can do a first test to see how much is in my system, but do I have to do a lab test if I'm not, if I don't show any physical signs of being impaired.
This is what the debate is over. Do we say to
Yep.
officers, you can use discretion, so you can just quickly look at them and go, oh, I think they look impaired or don't look impaired? Or do we ask the officers to apply some kind of practical test, like a field test on the road, where they're testing people's balance, whether they can walk a straight line, or do some other test like using a device, that the alertometer or the Druid app? And from that result, if they pass that, then the officers say, look, you're not impaired, you're a medical user, off you go, I'm not going to carry on doing more tests. So the debate here is, if we're going to change the testing regime to protect medical cannabis users, what's the framework for that? So they're not. Yeah. So there was a few.
Sorry, Rachel.
I recommend going and reading the submissions
Yes.
from them and from just having a look for the name. There was another lady that she was a medical cannabis user and she spoke and she was really good. I can't find her name. Sorry.
No, that's and thank you. I will look at that.
Yeah,
Yes.
people are proposing a few extra protections anyway. So for medical cannabis users, and they have different ideas have been thrown around. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those who are wondering, this is the sort of place you have these sorts of debates, is at select committee, because that's when the public actually puts them in. You put out the ideas, then the committee goes through and evaluate the ideas, and it recommends the changes from what the bill was at first reading before it gets sent off to second reading. Just for those who are thinking whether it's a done deal in the law or not, it is the process of how our parliamentary system is meant to work, which is the public submission aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd have to do is, because it is an interesting discussion and it is one I want to be accurate on, but it'd be interesting to see how much THC needs to be in your system versus how much of that causes noticeable impairment to driving, and whether or not there can be a balance struck up between the two in testing. I'd have to see what the averages are, because I think that would probably be the fairest way to do oral testing. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, I'd have to look at the stats for that.
Okay, well, I think we've spent a very long time on this bill, so let's get up to the quick part of going through for the legislation. There are 2 submissions closing very soon. This is the improvement arrangement for surrogacy bill. Those submissions close on Wednesday, the 18th of September, which is 2 Wednesdays away, and also got the regulatory system economic development amendment bill, which by the sounds of it sounds like an omnibus bill. For those who want to sit there and become Patreon members, you can scan the QR code that's on the top left-hand side of the screen where I pointed to, but you guys can't actually see where I pointed my hands. And going on through there. It's been a very interesting night. It's a very weird recess week, the fact that there was only one bill at select committee.
It was a loaded bill.
Yeah, because normally during the week you normally have 2 to 3 select committee bills tend to happen on a recess week for public submissions. This time it was 1, but we would say that's associated with the Māori King's death, and pretty much basically as soon as it was announced, the Parliament website basically turned into submissions, turned into crickets. So all we saw it was that one bill. So it's made things very, very interesting. So, how have we found tonight?
Interesting, at times a little bit tense with chat. Listen, I apologise to chat if they had any impression of me of being, hey, this person is like, it's like this person is going to come in here like a giga chad and, be like the biggest advocate ever for smoking and driving, and I'm just not. This is actually one of the topics I'm most weakest on, and I wish I was stronger on it. I did try to look up data and statistics before coming in here. I should have done better prep. I apologise for that, but I really do appreciate talking to you, Rachel, because it's not every day I get to talk to someone who specialises in a field like this. So thank you so much. And I hope
thank you very much for the opportunity. It's often so hard to be able to talk anything in depth. At all.
I hope I wasn't too dumb for you.
I've learned a lot, and can I also say
nothing's dumb because most people have very little knowledge of this issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and can we thank my friend Martin Jenkins, who was the original person I invited on the show, for recommending Rachel to step in, because you're absolute gold. You know, like, this is light years ahead of what I know. Like, I know, the stuff I know is local, is like election laws, that sort of it. That's where I know my stuff, or social welfare. This is just like, I know hardly anything.
Yeah.
So I'm learning things at the same time, and that's the aim of it, is, you know, to walk out here with more knowledge than what we walked in with.
Absolutely. I mean, I've learned quite a bit, and you know, hearing arguments against and hearing some arguments for is very helpful because it gives you a more balanced perspective.
Yeah, we could go on, but like
we could, yes.
That's plenty. That is plenty. Yeah.
I think it's a good place to end it.
Okay, so for those who are online, we'll be back here at 8 p.m. next Sunday. We'll be putting out our polls from 10 p.m. Tuesday night for what bills to cover, because next week is a sitting week. So we'll sit there and find out what are the most popular bills, and then on Friday we'll set the run sheet and present the show ready for Sunday for doing the research. Thank you, Rachel and Laura, for joining us tonight. And if you want to stay for after-show chats, once the opening credits have finished and the stream's been cut off, we can sit there and have an honest conversation without the cameras on.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you for watching, and we'll see you next Sunday.
All right, cheers, everyone.
Thank you for watching The Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at